Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Stitch Sessions. It's fall time and November has arrived already. That's a new month. So we have a new gift of crochet. And this month's gift is the really adorable, I like to call them the Butterscotch Babe Mittens. And it's just simply because I've made them in this really fun colorway using gray and orange. Kind of looks like a creamsicle. I've also done a second pair in a like teal, maroony color and gray as someone has commissioned me to do, but it was so cute and so fun. I love the way these turned out, and you can make them in any size you want. That's what I love about this project. So we're going to start you off here with the cuff. We're going to work our way up to the heel of the hand. Just before we get to the thumb hole, we'll create the thumb hole and then finish the rest of the hand and then come back to do our thumb. And what I really love about this project is we're going to talk about how we're going to do a variation on the single crochet stitch. You can see it here, which creates a little bit of an X effect. So I haven't been able to figure out what the name of this stitch is. I've seen it done. So some people have called it the crossed single crochet or the crossed over single crochet. In any case, I love it. Gives it a great super texture, and it is fantastic for all of your winter and fall needs. And I'm super excited about showing you how to make it. So let's grab all of our materials and let's get stitching. All right, everybody, here we go. We're getting ready to make our mitten. Now, I've already done one here, and this one is the right hand, and I can tell that because I've got my seam here on the inside. You almost can't see it, but I know that it's there. So I am going to show you how to make the left hand. Now, the beautiful thing about working patterns like this is you could actually just make the exact same mitt. Like I could actually put this on my left hand and it doesn't really make a difference. It's only if you feel very particular about seeing where your seam is. Now I can see it because I know where to look for it, but in reality, it can just blend right in. So if you're a little bit newer to crochet, I would recommend just making an exact replica of the first one you make, okay? Now, as you can see in this example, I have done some color changes. Again, if you're super beginner, do not worry about changing colors. I would recommend doing all one color. And in fact, if you're a super beginner, I would recommend a solid color because a lot of times variegated yarns can make it tricky for you to find your stitches, okay? So I've called this the Butterscotch Babe Mitten just because of the orange and the gray reminds me of butterscotch candy for some reason. I love it. So this is a fun project to work on, and I'm really excited actually to show you this. There's many different ways actually of working a mitten. So we're going to start off with this one. I know I've shown you some fingerless gloves before, and this really neat stitch. It's a single crochet variation that just creates this really neat texture. So here we go. Let's talk about what we need. I have been using some leftovers of some yarn I had. Now, each of these balls were in 100 gram skeins. This, I believe, was the Vanna's Choice brand of yarn. It's a medium weight 4 and it's nice and soft. This one was a different type of yarn, but it's very similar in weight. It is a medium 4 and it's pretty bang on to similar. So this is a gray color, and this is some kind of a pumpkin-y orange color. You can do whatever colorway you like. In fact, I'm working on another mitten here that I've been commissioned to make, and I've used some gray and teal, and they also like the striped design. So there you have it. You can do it any which way you like. So I would say definitely even one 100 gram ball. I would say 100 to 150 grams would be enough for a pair of mittens. Of course, it always depends on the size you're going to make your mitten. We're going to work on an adult size mitten, but I'm going to talk you through how to kind of customize the size as you go. This one is slightly bigger. This one is actually for my brother. So it's a smidge big-ish on me, but I could get away with using it. So you've got that. As always, you're going to need a pair of scissors to snip your yarn and your trusty darning needle for sewing in your ends. And for this project, I am using a 6mm hook. It's also known as a size J or a 10. And this will keep my stitches somewhat relaxed, but because we're using a variation of the single crochet stitch, it will still be nice and snug, so it'll keep the heat in. So we are going to begin by starting with the cuff first. So I'm going to start with my orange color, and I'm just going to quickly go over the construction of the mitt. We're going to work it in 4 parts. We're going to start with the cuff, then we're going to work our way up to what I call the heel portion of the hand. We'll then leave an opening for the thumb. We'll work up the finger portion of the mitten, and then we'll come back and finish the thumb. So that's 4 pieces: cuff, heel, fingers, and thumb. But it will all be worked continuously. So what you want to do is, once you've got your yarn, you want to begin with a slip knot. Once you've gotten your slip knot, what you want to do is you want to chain a length that you would like the width of your cuff to be. So in this case, I chained a length of 10. Okay, so 10 basically from your wrist to where you comfortably want your cuff to end. Some people like a thinner cuff. That's completely up to you. Then you would make less number of chains. So I'm going to start off with 10. Okay, and then just to double check, what you want to do is you want to just see how you like it. Just put it against your wrist there. Now, because I've already made one, all I do is I'm just going to make the same number of chains I made with the first one. It's really important you make them exactly the same as the first one so they look nice and even. And one more thing I should have recommended you have is a piece of paper and a pen. So when you're working on your first one, you want to write down your particular measurements that you're working on. If you're working on mittens for a child, if you have that child handy, that's great. Or you can just adjust the number of chains that you're using. Okay, so maybe for a child, you might want to chain 6. Okay, in my case, I've chained 10. I like this length. And then what I'm going to do now, some people will chain an additional 1 to turn. I am just going to go right into my project. So in reality, the length of my cuff, or the width, is actually 9 stitches. And I'm going to explain to you why right now. We're going to work some single crochets back across. And in order to begin our row to turn, we're going to skip the first chain and work into the second chain from the hook. So that means you're going to insert, pull through, and there you have your first single crochet. And we're going to do that all the way across into each chain. And because I've skipped that one at the beginning, I will now always have 9 stitches I'm going to be working into. So you want to do that all the way to the end. Okay, so I've got my 9 stitches, so my work looks something like this. It doesn't look like much of anything yet. And what we're going to do now is we're going to chain 1, and you're going to turn your work. And we're going to continue doing single crochets back and forth, but what's going to be different is, instead of going into that full stitch, see where that V is? We're only going to work into the back loops. Now remember, this first stitch here belongs to the bottom of this chain 1, so we don't work into that one. we go into this one right here. So you work into the back loops only. That's that loop that's furthest away from you. We'll pull through. And that's what we're going to do all the way to the end. And the reason why we're working into the back loops here is you'll probably notice, try to do a few here, that when you work into the back loops, it pushes the forward loops to the front. And that creates that really neat ribbing effect. So again, if I pull this one here, see how there's these ridges here? That's what creates that effect, is when we work into the back loops only. So that's what we're going to do for our cuff. So go ahead and do that to the end of the row. Okay, so I have my last stitch coming up here. And remember, the chain one sometimes makes it tricky to see. So if you're ever unsure, go back and count the stitches you already have. Now, I know I have 8 because remember, this chain one here is easy to get lost. So you have to make sure that you don't stitch that one too tight, because then it'll cause your work to buckle inward, okay? So just like here, this is a chain one, and there's my V there. So I'm going to go right into that back loop. And now I know I have 9 stitches, okay? So for me, every single row, I have to make sure I have 9 stitches. So that's what you're going to continue doing. Chain one, turn your work. And remember, you're not going to go into this first one here. You're going to go into the next one. So the chain one is off the hook. This is the first stitch you have. You want to go into the second stitch that you see, because technically the chain one counts as one, okay? So this is what you're going to do until you get a length for your cuff that will fit around your wrist. So you can see this. Let me just put that down here. We're going to keep working this until you get a length, and test that length out, wrap it around your wrist. So you want it to sit snugly, not necessarily tight, but just snug, because remember, again, the fibers will loosen. So once you get the length and then it'll fit comfortably around your wrist, then we're going to stop. Now for me, I made, because this is for a gentleman, I made about 28 rows. On average, a female adult mitten, you're going to hear the number 26 a lot. So a lot of people will make a medium-sized mitten cuff at 26 rows or 26 stitches for the average female medium-sized mitten. So for you, you are going to, it will all depend on the wrist size, but you're probably going to vary anywhere from 26 rows, maybe even up as high as 30 if you have a thicker wrist. So go ahead and work the length of your cuff, and then I'll meet you back around when we are going to discuss seaming up our cuff and working on the heel of our mitten. Okay, guys, so I have completed 28 rows. So for me, I've just loosely measured it around my wrist, and it just fits nicely. Now, this actually already fits a bit loosely, and I think I had mentioned before that I am making this for a gentleman. So this is actually a bit loose on me because I know it'll sit a little bit more snugly for him. So just FYI, I have 28 rows. On average, for an adult female, it's usually around the 26 row mark or 26 stitches. So just keep that in mind. But again, the beauty of projects like this is you can measure it to your needs as you go. So we're now done the length of our cuff that will go around our wrist. So now what we want to do is we want to cinch it shut, okay? And so what you want to do is you are going to chain an additional 1, and now you want to press together the 2 ends here. So this is the row we just finished, and this is that first set of chains we began our project with. So our foundation chain rows right there. So once we chain 1, and we have these pressed together, we should have the same number of stitches in the first row as we did in the foundation chain row. So what you want to do is you're going to go into the second loop from the hook. Remember, that's the one we just chained. And you're going to pick up the back loop of this first row here, and you're just going to connect it into the very first stitch of your foundation chain row. And if you have a hard time seeing it from the back, just turn it over a wee bit, and you should be able to see it right there. Okay. And we are just going to slip stitch our way through these. So here's the loop that was on your hook. This is the back loop of the first row you're working in, and this is the foundation chain row. So we're going to slip stitch through all three of these loops, and this is now going to connect our work together. Okay. And then we're going to go into the very next stitch and do the exact same things. So the next stitch is right here. I'm going to go into the back loop, and then I'm going to find the very next chain stitch of the foundation chain row, and it's going to be right there. I try to get a couple of the loops, but if you only get one loop of the chain row, the foundation chain row, it's okay. It gets a little tricky because it's the first row. Just like that. And that's what you're going to do all the way across into the back loop of the front row, and then into the very next loop of the foundation chain row, and you will slip stitch across. Okay, so you're getting something that's starting to look like that. Now, this may get a little bit frustrating if you're a little bit newer to crochet, because this particular side I know can be tricky to see where you're inserting your hook. So my advice is this: go slowly, be patient, and do the best that you can. It most likely won't be absolutely perfect, and especially the first couple of times you're working on a project like this. Just take it with a grain of salt, and at the end, as long as we've seamed up our side and it is secure, we have won the victory here. Okay, so into the back loop, and then, so how I tell is, see, if I pull that apart, I can see that that is going into there. So the very next loop should be right there. Okay, and then I slip stitch into all of them. So that's what we're going to continue to do all the way till we get to the end. So for me, I have 10 stitches. So I'm going to make sure that I end up having the same number once I cinch up the end here. And if you're worried about this little tail here, we are going to tackle that very shortly. So just finish sealing up your side here, and then we will continue on. And this is the very last one I'm coming up to. So there is the back loop there. And here is my last stitch from the foundation chain row. And what makes it easy to identify is you can see the slip knot right there. So I'm just going to insert my hook right into that loop and slip stitch through. So now you have something that looks like this. So it kind of blends in. So by us slip stitching into the back loops, it still continues the look of this ribbing effect. So it kind of blends in a little bit. So that way it's not too obvious where your seam is. Only you would probably know where it is. So there we have our cuff, and make sure you try yours on. So see, mine is a bit loose because again, I'm making it for a gentleman. But if it being nice and cozy is the best, because, you know, the fibers do stretch over time, and with some washing and things like that, and stretching, putting it on, taking it off kind of thing. So we have now finished our cuff, and we are going to change colors shortly. But before we do that, now remember, you don't have to change colors. I'm just going to show you exactly how I made my particular mitten, which involved me changing colors. So whether you're changing or not, the procedure is still the same. So we want to now do a finishing row, which actually now we're working in rounds, around the top of our cuff. Okay, and this is where we're going to work our tail in. And what we want to do, why we want to do that is so that we have a nice edge to work into. So because our work was worked back and forth this way, these are the sides of your stitches. So it's a little bit of a rough or ragged edge. So we're just going to do one single crochet into the side of all of our stitches to give us a nice finishing round to then continue building our work from. Okay, so we're going to chain one and then right back into the same stitch we just came out of, which is right there. We're going to insert our hook and just do a single crochet. So this is my working yarn here, and I am going to work over my short tail as I go. If you find that a little cumbersome, you can always just weave in your tail at the end. So don't worry if that bothers you. You don't have to work it in as you go. So I'm just going to pull that through. So I have 2 loops, and then I'll resolve my single crochet, just like that. Now, the general rule when working into the sides of single crochets is that you would put one single crochet into the side of another single crochet. That would give you the same height. So the really great thing about working with a ribbed piece of work is that we know that the ridges that dip in, that represents one row, and the ridges that pop forward, that represents a second row. So a really great way to know where to place your stitches is to just find anywhere. So technically I just put a stitch into a ridge row. Now I'm going to go into a dip row, I'm going to call it. I'm just going to place my hook anywhere where I feel comfortable and make sure that I get at least a couple of loops here so that my work will be nice and secure. And I'll work over my tail, and then I'll just single crochet, just like that. And now the next row I want to work into is a ridge row. So I'm going to find somewhere along this ridge a good little spot to insert my hook. It might be a little snug. There we go. And then I'm going to pull through and single crochet. So now it's just giving it a really nice finished look. So I know that I have 28 rows, so that means I should have 28 stitches by the time I come all the way around and come to the beginning again. So for now, we're just going to continue on. So now I'm going into a dip row. So that means it's in between the ridges. I'm going to insert where I think looks good. Remember, it's all how you like it and what you think is uniform. The next one is a ridge row, so I'm going to try to insert somewhere in the ridge row, right on top there. Might be a little snug. And then just single crochet, careful not to split your yarn. Just like that. So you can see it actually blends in quite nicely. All right, so one single crochet into the side of each row. 28 rows for me will equal 28 stitches. If you're working with 26, you'll have 26 stitches. If you're working with 30, you'll have 30. So go ahead and finish your round, and I'll meet you when we're coming right back up to the beginning again. Okay, I've just done my 28th stitch, and now I'm going to go into the very first stitch. Not this chain one here, but this first stitch here. And the reason why is because I went into the 20th stitch snugged up right next to that chain one. So now I'm going to slip stitch to join. But before I pull all the way through like that, that's a typical slip stitch join. So you can see that that blends in really nicely. But for me, I want to introduce now my gray color. Okay, so you can see that here in the mitten I've already done. Now, if you're not changing colors, you would just slip stitch exactly like I just did, and you're going to continue on as we go. But for those that would like to do a color change, here is how you do it. So I'm just going to take this out, just so I have that last loop again. So I'm going to insert my hook to slip stitch, but instead of the orange, I am now going to pick up my gray, and that is the color I'm going to feed through. Okay, so I'm going to feed that through here and through that stitch, and then I'm just going to pull that snug. And just to keep things organized, I am now going to snip that orange, leave a little bit of a tail. Some people actually like to knot it right away. Depends on my mood, but right now I'm going to give it one little knot just so that I feel it's secure there. Okay, so the two tails have been knotted together, and you can do this a couple of times if you like. And then I'm going to work over that tail. Okay, just like that. So we're going to chain one, and now we are going to single crochet, but this is where things will differ a little bit. Remember earlier in the video I talked about how we're going to do a slight variation on the single crochet. A typical single crochet creates V's in our work, okay? But this stitch creates an X'd effect. So if you pull it back like that, they look like little X's instead of V's. And it's just a very, very subtle variation, but it's something that I really liked it because it just kind of snuggled the single crochets in even a little bit closer together. So I just thought that was such a neat stitch. I actually don't know what the name of this stitch is. I've seen it done a lot on Instagram. So I'm calling this the crossed single crochet stitch. So here is where things differ. I'm going to go back into that same, I'm going to insert my hook into that same space there. And a typical single crochet would have you yarning over, that means in front of your hook, and pulling through. But with this technique, what we're going to do is we're going to yarn under, okay? So that means that I would circle my hook over the yarn as opposed to having the yarn over my hook, okay? It's very subtle, but it'll create a cool little difference. So I'm going to take my hook and yarn it over, or loop it over, and then hook my yarn through. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do it again. Now, I've seen some people do it where they now yarn over as usual, but I am going to keep it hooked under for this whole project. So then when I pull that through, see what that does? It actually twists these over. So when you do a few of these in a row, it will create an X look. You can't really see anything right now, so I'm going to do a few of these. So again, I'm going to go, now we have stitches to work into, so I'm going to go in the very next stitch. I'm going to insert my hook, and again, I'm just working over those tails. And instead of yarning over, I'm going to yarn under, or yarn from behind. See that? Normally we would go this way. For this project, I am going that way. I'm going to pull it through, and then I'm going to hook it under again and pull through. So see that? See how they're looking like they're crossing each other? And as you do more and more rows, it really continues with that effect. So let's do that again. We're going to insert our hook into the next stitch, yarn under or behind, and pull it through. Really relaxed. Then I'm going to yarn in front again and pull through. See that? Just gives it a little twisted look. I really like that. So I'm going to do it one more time. Insert into the very next stitch, and then you want to yarn under, pull it through, yarn under again, and pull it through. You want to be careful maybe not to stitch too tightly, but there you go. So you can see they're starting to twist over each other. I'm going to do that once more here. So you're going to insert your hook, Now, instead of yarn under, you can just simply think of taking your hook and just hooking over, if that's easier for you. Because I know it's going to feel funny the way you're handling the yarn a little differently. And then you're going to hook over and pull through again. Just like that. Now, I've seen it where some people naturally, when they crochet, I've seen some people who naturally hook this way. And I mean, I guess there's no crochet police out there, but it does create a different effect. So whether you yarn over or under, it will make a difference in how the fabric is created. And in this case, it's ever so subtle, but I love the effect. Now, if you're finding this too cumbersome, it's a bit too much to deal with the yarn and holding your hook, then you know what? Just do your usual single crochet stitches. It's not the end of the world. You will be a-okay. Or if you want to do half double crochet stitches, you can. So this template, I'll call it, for this pattern is the same no matter really what stitch you use. So I just so happen to be using this crossed single crochet, or you can call it a twisted single crochet if you wish, because I just love how that creates a little X mark here. So once you do a few more rounds, you will see what I mean. So in the meantime, what I want you to do is do one stitch into each stitch all the way around. So now that we have stitches to work into, it's going to be a lot easier to see. And then I'm going to meet up with you right back here. We're going to talk about how we're going to continue to work in the spiral round. So we're no longer going to use slip stitches after this, okay? So for me, I have 28 stitches, so I'm going to make sure that I go 28 stitches all the way around. Okay, I've just come up to my last stitch here. Whoops. Hooking under. And so instead of slip stitching here now, what we're going to do, we're going to skip over this one here, and we're going to insert into that next stitch, and we're going to just work our crossed single crochet stitch as usual. So what that does is it just allowed our stitch to just jump up into the next row. And what you want to do, if you're not one much for counting or keeping your count, you're going to insert a stitch marker, it could be a safety pin, anything you like, into that first stitch you just created here. Okay. What that's going to do is it's just going to remind you where the beginning of your row is. Okay. And here I am coming up to my last stitch. So I now have 32 stitches all the way around. So I've increased in 4 spots. So if you actually just take out your work, or take out your hook, I should say, and you were to lay your cuff flat with the seam down the center, technically you should have like what I call the 4 corners where there's an increase. So where the stitch marker, there's an increase, and there should be an increase in each of the 2 sides, and there should be another increase right across the way there, which you can see. Right, so see, here's the bend. There we go. Sorry guys, my camera is not focusing. So see how there's 2 stitches coming out of one? So generally speaking, the increase in this round is nice and even, and that's why we spread it out as opposed to putting the increase all in one spot. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to continuously stitch a few rounds until you get to the height, until you reach the knuckle of your thumb, okay? So some people might only need 4 rows, some people might need 7, some people might need 10, okay? So just continue now. There's no more increases, and it's just straight through. So I now have 32 stitches, so I'm going to continue having 32 stitches. So I just took my stitch marker out just so I can place my next stitch there. So this is now the first stitch of my next round. And then all I do is I replace my stitch marker in there. And I just like doing that because visually it makes it much easier for me to see where I'm at. You can also gauge it by where your seam is, but if you like a little bit more precision in your work, stitch marker goes a long way. And you can use anything. I mean, this is a safety pin from a garment that I purchased. You can use a safety pin, a bobby pin, a piece of yarn, anything you like, okay? So you are off to the races, one stitch into every stitch for a few rounds until you get to that place where we're going to start talking about creating your thumb hole. So right now we've been working on the heel. So we've done the cuff, and now we've started working on what I call the heel of your hand, and then we're going to tackle the thumb. Okay, so I have done my 11 rows just like I did with the first mitten here. Okay, and you may only need 7 or 5 depending on the size of your hand. Great way to measure is to actually fit the glove to your wrist, and you want it to hit just below, just right around where that knuckle is. Now, for me, my cuff is sitting a little lower, again, because I am making this for someone with a slightly larger hand than myself. So that's why mine will have a little bit more length here, but that's about it. So I had already done my left mitten, my right. I keep calling this my left today. I'm not sure why. So now we're going to work on making the thumb hole. So now, because this particular mitten is going to be for my left hand, but like I said, you can make them exactly the same. So what we're going to talk about now, you can do for the right hand as well, okay? So because this one is for my left, I know my thumb hole is going to sit somewhere to my left, okay? So once I take this out, I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit. I'm just going to lay it flat, and I would like my seam to be on the inside edge of my wrist, okay? So this stitch marker is where I finished my round. So my thumb hole is going to be in this area here. So what I want to do is I want to go to the edge here, and I have 32 stitches, right? So I am going to count 3 stitches back from here. So that is the corner right there. I'm going to have 1, 2, and 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue stitching right up until I hit this one here. Okay, so that means I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more stitches to go. So I'm just on the other side of my stitch marker here. So I have just going to move my stitch marker just so that I have a little place. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and I'm just going to put that down, and so that's about right. Okay, and I might even just try it on again as well. So what I always do when I'm trying it on for myself, so I know my seam is somewhere around here, is I just take wherever I've stopped. So I knew I wanted 3 stitches in, and then I just take my loop and I go over here, and I just deduce, is that a comfortable spacing? So for me, that's going to be pretty comfortable to stop there. So what we usually do, so you can see what I did here is This is a great way to kind of eyeball and see where it's going to be comfortable to create the hole. You don't want it to be too tight, right? Because remember, when you're putting the mitt on and off, you don't want to have to like force your hand through. So I always just like the last stitch to sit just before the crease of my thumb to my hand. And I do that and I loop over here. Okay. And I see how that feels, if it's nice and relaxed and comfortable. And then I'll simply just count the number of stitches around. And those are the number of stitches I am going to skip over to create our hole. And I'm going to explain that to you right now. There is kind of a general rule to work with. So for me, I know generally, because I've made a few of these already. For me, because I'm skipping 1, 2, and 3, then I come around the bend here and I'm going to basically skip the same amount so that I can match up with this last stitch here. Hopefully you can see that okay. The lighting is not the best right now. Okay, so that means that I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches right about there. Okay, so in order to create the hole, we always want to chain 2 stitches extra than the space we've created there. So I'm going to chain 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I want to be careful I'm not doing them too tightly either, because we're going to have to work a few times into these chains. Then I'm going to come back here. I'm going to skip 7 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Into that 7th stitch, I'm actually going to insert my hook and continue to do my stitch, which in this case is that crossed single crochet. And then I'm going to do a couple more into each of the next stitches, just so I have something solid here. Okay, and now we've got a hole. We've got a thumb hole. Okay, so again, you're going to take it out, and now you can actually test it. You can test it. Is it a little bit too loose? Is it a little bit too tight? So it's a bit loose on me, but again, this is for a slightly bigger hand. I am going to go back 1 stitch here because this is going to stretch and the fibers are going to loosen. Okay, so if your whole, bottom of your thumb is going through, that opening is too big. So you will either take 1 chain out, or you will stitch 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to undo this and we're going to take 1 chain out. So just 1. And then we're still going to, so now we've got 8 chains, but we're still going to go back into that 7th stitch. Okay, whoops. And then I'm going to try this on again. Okay, there we go. That feels a little bit more normalized. So you can see that the bottom part of my thumb isn't coming all the way through. It's still movable and it sits nicely. And now the rest is going to be super duper easy. I'm just going to continue on. And I'm going to finish this round, but not all the way. So for me, once I made my thumb hole here, so I had my 11 rounds, I used the gray to create the thumb hole, as you can see. But then soon after that, I changed colors, okay? And then I went back to my my orange again. So for those of you that are not changing colors, you would just continue on and you would continue to do your single crochets all the way around. I'm going to take this opportunity actually. I'm going to change colors right here because it's right at the crook of my thumb, which is a great spot to make a very subtle color change. Okay, so I'm going to reintroduce my orange. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out that last stitch because the best way to introduce a color change is just before you're about to resolve the previous stitch. So I'm still going to insert and you hook over to pull through, but I'm not going to resolve with this color. Now I'm going to pick up the orange again, and I am going to pull that one through to resolve the stitch. And then I'm just going to snugly pull that gray tight, and I'm going to do a couple of stitches before I fasten off. So now we just continue on as usual. I'm going to ignore the gray. I'm going to pick up the orange. Okay. And I'm just going to continue on as before. Okay. And I'm just going to work over a few of these. Oops. And then, now's a good time to cut my gray, snip my gray. And I'm actually just going to give this a little knot here. Just like that. And then I'm going to work over that. And that is it for a little while. So now I've got my orange. And I'm going to continue stitching as I've done before. And now this part is super easy because we're just working the rest of the hand. Okay? So you just keep doing one stitch into each stitch, and you're just going to keep doing this around and around and around until you cover the tip of your tallest finger. Okay? I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I forgot about this little guy. So just go around all the way, and at this point you can take your stitch marker out because the biggest thing was to understand where to do your thumb hole. So you can take that stitch marker out if it bothers you. So go all the way around, and when you get to just about the opening of your thumb hole, I'm going to meet back up with you here just to kind of talk you through how to work through that chain, which is pretty straightforward, but it can be a little bit wonky. So I'll meet you back here in a second. Okay, so I've come to my last stitch before my thumb hole. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to work into those chains across the thumb hole, okay? So the first chain is right there. And it will feel a little bit, whoops, did I hook over? I can't remember. Oh, actually, this one you can still work into those two loops there. So hook over. And now we're just going to continue going into each chain. Okay, and you're going to work your stitch as usual. And they are going to loosen up a bit, and that is totally normal. Okay, so don't worry if you feel like your chains are getting all stretched out. That is a-okay. And usually, which I should have mentioned earlier, I usually recommend chaining a little bit snugger than you normally would. Not too much, because you are going to work another round of stitches into the same chain. So you just want to be careful. not to be too tight and not to be too loose either. Okay, so there's the next chain right there. And then this is, that was my 8th one there. And now I can work into, a regular stitch right there. Just like that. And now, so I've made my way across from those chains. Don't worry, they're a little bit loosened up there. Okay. And then I'm just working right back into my regular stitches again. And again, no slip stitches required. You're just going to keep stitching right away into the round, and that is how we're going to continue. Now, those of you that did not switch colors, you would do exactly the same thing. You would follow the same way. The difference is you wouldn't have to worry about attaching the new color. So you would stitch into each of the chains and then across there. And these chains got a little stretched out, but don't fret. So, and just to be on the safe side here, I'm going to take it out and see how I feel about that. So that's going to be comfortable. It's a little loose for me because my hand is smaller than the person I'm making it for, but that's going to be, yeah, that's going to be good. So you want to make sure you can move around in it and you're easy peasy. So now the rest of the job will be a little easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue working one stitch into each stitch all the way around. So now we're going to finish our hand, the finger portion, and you want to go right up until the very tip of your tallest finger. Okay, so you're just going to do rows and rows and rows and rows and rows. For those of you that want to change colors, the technique for changing the colors is the same as we've done before. Just about before you resolve the previous stitch, you're going to pull through your new color. And however many rows you want to do between each color is up to you. As you can see, for my gray, it was thicker in the heel of the hand, and then I did thinner rows. It's completely up to you. Those of you that continuing on doing a solid color should be super easy. You just continue going around. So I will meet up with you once you've covered your fingertip. Okay, so here we have it, and my finger is now being, so now my mitten has reached right to the top of my tallest finger. So, which is thankful because I'm pretty much running out of yarn. So we're going to do one more round now. And again, I did some color changes. Some of you that are a little bit newer, I would definitely recommend staying with one color. Okay, so we're going to do one more round. And we are going to do a decrease round. Okay, so what that means is it's going to help us to close in the top of our mitt a little bit. So now we're going to insert and do a twisted single crochet as before, hooking under. But instead of resolving, we're going to go into the very next stitch and pull up. Whoops. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert as usual, hook over, pull through, but don't resolve it. We're now going to go into the next stitch, hook over, pull through. So you'll have 3 loops on your hook. You'll hook through and pull through all 3. And we've discussed this a little bit down here just after the thumb. So we're basically kind of pinching 2 stitches together to create 1, and that gives us a decrease. We are actually going to decrease every stitch around. So that means when we go into the very next stitch, we'll pull through, but then go into the very next stitch again, pull through. So we're going to decrease these two together. And you're going to do that for every stitch around. So basically, it will take your stitch count and cut it in half. Okay, so you'll insert, pull through, insert in the next, pull through, and then pull through all three. So you can see there's 3 decreases side by side. So you're going to do that all the way around until you come back to where you started decreasing. And from there, we're ready to cinch in our top. Okay, gang, so I've done a decrease stitch all the way around. So now you can really see that the top part of our mitten is really starting to form inward, which is exactly what we want. And right down to the wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to pull this through to fasten it off. Okay, so just do that nice and tight. And now I'm going to take my yarn needle and I am just going to sew around the top to cinch it in. Okay, so I'm just going to weave in and out. So I'm going to go in, then out, in, then out, all the way around. In, then out. Just pull a bit of it through now. Just pull my yarn through. Make it a little bit snug. See how it's going to cinch in a bit? But don't do it all just yet, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. So you're going to go all the way around, just kind of weaving your needle, whoops, and through the front, and through the back, and through the front, and through the back. Okay. And we're almost there. You can see it's really starting to cinch in. Just about at the beginning again, which is right here. Whoops. And then I'm going to push it through the back one more time. And you can start pinching it in a bit. See how it's closing in? But before I pull it completely, what I want to do is I want to feed my needle in, and then I'm going to turn my mitten inside out because I want to finish sewing it in from the inside. So see, there's my needle. I'm going to just finish feeding that through. And so I want to do the rest of the sewing on this side. So now you can really cinch it a little bit tighter if you like. And once you're here, be careful you don't sew the top part of your mitten. Sometimes it's even a little bit easier to kind of put your hand on the inside, then you can feel where you are. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to see how it creates a little center there at the top. I'm just going to go back and forth across, like in a cross shape, and then I'll come through here. And basically just sewing it shut the rest of the way. So I've cinched it shut. And now I'm just going to sew it across, back and forth, as many times as you like until you feel that it is secure and that the top of your mitten is nicely closed in so it'll stay nice and warm and so that it won't fall apart on you. Especially in winter, you're going to be sticking it in the wash quite often. Maybe you're going to be having some snow fun. Who knows? So you just want to be prepared for all things. So you're just going to go back and forth until you are ready to completely fasten off. And then sometimes what I like to do is start tying in a couple of knots along the way. So from here, whoops, then I'll just kind of go back in before I close the loop to kind of create a bit of a knot effect. And that's it. And the top of your mitt is pretty much done. And the last thing we have to do is our thumb. Okay. All right. So we are now ready to move on to our thumb. We made it just to the end. Oh, got a little tail there we got to snip off. And there we go. So we just made it to the very end of that skein. So part of me was like, oh, relieved, but we forgot a little something. So if you recall, this mitten also had a bit of the orange in it, but I am not going to worry one bit. The beautiful thing about handmade items and handmade art is that the beauty is in the, I don't want to call it imperfections, but inconsistencies. I just love how that twisted or crossed over single crochet gives it that X texture. I just love that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pick up our gray and do the whole thumb in gray. And I think that's actually what's going to make this mitten look that much, this pair, I should say, look that much more unique. And the individual will definitely know which ones belong to them. So this is how we will work the thumb of our mitten. And again, I think I've mentioned this before. Once you make one, you can make the exact replica for the other hand, and you are A-okay. Looks like I've got a bunch of knots in here. Let's snip that out. Okay, so we are going to start with a slip knot. And I would recommend starting in one of the creases of your thumb. So I would recommend starting on the inside crease. So again, even though these can be done exactly the same, I know that this is going to be for my left hand. So I'm going to start at the crease that's on the inside of my mitten. If my thumb was coming out this way, right, so it's for this hand, I would start at this crease. So we're going to start at the inside here, and I do have my mitt right side facing out. That's exactly how we want to work. So let me just lower that here. So we're going to insert our hook, and we're going to slip stitch to join. So you just pull that through and through, nice and gentle. And then I'm going to chain one. And I'm just going to go into the very next stitch. Sorry, I'm going to go into the very same stitch. And I'm just going to continue on doing my crossed single crochet. Whoops. Can get away from you sometimes. I'm not used to picking up the yarn from that side. Just like that. And so that's what I'm going to do all the way around. I'm going to insert one into each stitch. Okay, and I'm coming up to my next crease here. So I've already worked into this. So what I want to do is I want to just snug these two stitches together. So because we're coming up around the bend to work around through our initial chains to create the thumb holes. So what we want to do is insert our hook. We should know all about decreases now. Pull through and then go right up into the next one. So it's just coming up around the bend there. Pull through. So 3 loops. I'm just trying to work over my short tail there. And then I'm just going to pull through all 3. And what that does, it just kind of helps snuggle in that corner so we don't have too much of a gap. If you still end up with something that kind of looks like that, Most of the time this will relax once the mitt is done. But if that still bothers you, can go back later and just kind of just whip stitch it a little closer together. But it usually does relax. So now we're going to work into those chains that we created. And just continue doing the same thing. One stitch into each stitch around. And I'm just continuing to work over that tail. And into the very next one. So it's going to feel a little bit flimsy because it's only the chain basically that we have to work into. We're working into the bottom side of the chain. So see, it's stretching out. Don't worry at all. As we continue to do more rows, it will gain more strength. Okay, and I have one more here. So I'm just going to snuggle it next to my next one. So that's a stitch, and then I'm just going to go right into the top of the first full chain one. And that's all going to just snuggle it up nicely together. And so technically we're going up into the second row here. And I just pull through all three. So the first round of our thumb is now done. And I'm just trying mine on here just to make sure it still feels good. So in my case, I have, because I know many of you just like to follow right along with the video, my thumb hole has 15 stitches. Yours might have 16. Even if you followed me, yours might have 14. That's a-okay. The main thing with a project like this is to keep trying it on, because then you can adjust it as you go. So this feels pretty good. See, it's nice and relaxed there. I mean, for me, I don't like it when it's super tight up against the thumb because that means it's going to restrict my movement. So I like my thumb to be really nice and relaxed, especially if you're making this for kids. There's a lot of hand stuff going on. They're playing around. So you want to have some movement, or even adults, basically. You know, you're cleaning off your car. You want to be able to, you know, grip things, all kinds of things. So go with what works best for you. And now we're simply, the rest is kind of easy. You're just going to continue working. So I've already worked that one. I'm going to go into the next one. Just going to simply work one single crochet, which is the single crossed crochet, I'm calling it. One into each stitch all the way around. And we're going to work in the continuous round like we've done with the mitten itself. So there's no slip stitching. You just keep going around and around and around. And you're going to go until you reach the length of your thumb that you would like. So in this case, I went just about, I went right up until you could maybe see just the little wee tip, because then you're going to do a round of decreases just like we did with the top, and we're going to stitch it in. And you are good to go. So very easy, beginner-friendly project, all right? But I'm going to meet back up with you when you're cinching up your thumb just to make sure we're all on the same page. So just continue doing one stitch into each stitch all the way around until you build up the height of the thumb that you need. Okay, so I've worked up my thumb here and I can just see the tip of my thumb. So now what I want to do is I'm going to do the decreasing round just like we did at the top. Then I'm going to fasten off and cinch in my thumb. And we are ready to go. So as we can see, this thumb ended up being completely gray, but I think it's kind of cute. Little mismatched yet matched gloves. All right, guys, I shall stop playing and take you through what we need to do next. All right, so our decrease round, which I think you should be starting to feel like a bit of an expert now. You're going to insert your hook, pull it through, and then into the very next stitch, you'll insert again and pull through 3 loops, and then you'll pull through all 3. So we're going to decrease each stitch all the way around. So I had 15 stitches at the end. I will probably end up with 8 because 14 divided by 2 is 7, but because I have 15, I'll probably have 1 stitch left over. Again, if you have 1 extra or 1 less, not the end of the world. We just want to make sure that we're starting to close in the top of our thumb, and then we are completely done our mittens. Okay, I've got 1 stitch left here, and I'm just going to decrease it with the next one. And we are now done. Okay, so it's almost cinched in. And as usual, I like to take it off and try it on. Make sure that feels comfortable. I'm pretty good with that. And I am going to now snip my yarn, and I'm good to cinch that in. Okay, so I will, and I am actually going to turn this inside out right away to kind of work on it. Okay, whoops, that means I've got to pull through my tail. Just like that. Okay. And I'm just going to feed it through my yarn needle here and do the exact same thing we did with the top of the mitt. Now, because there's not much to cinch up, that's why I'm just going to go ahead and just sew it in. So I'm just going to come across the top here and sew it, and then come through, whoops, come through the side and sew that. And that's it. Just go back and forth until you feel that you've got a nice secured closure, just like that. And then you want to maybe knot it once or twice just to keep it nice and secure. Sometimes I'll weave it in like that as I go along. Then you're going to snip your yarn and you will be ready to go. And if this is only your first mitten, then you would move on and start your second mitten exactly the same way, and it will work. Done. Okay. I'm always so excited at the end of these types of projects. The end is here. And this is my left mitt. So I'm just going to bring that up there. I'm going to try that on, make sure it feels good, which I love. You can just tell that the seam is there. So adorable. I might just go in later and just snuggle that little hole in with a whip stitch, and let's make sure the other one fits too. Love, love, love it. And I love this kind of creamsicle butterscotch colorway that kind of I made it with. And there you have it. Some really fun and easy, beginner-friendly crochet mittens. You can do this just using single crochet stitches. You can use it do it just using one simple color. You can use 2 colors, 3 colors, variegated yarn, whatever you like. So, as always, if you have any questions at all, and I know especially sometimes around the thumb area or cinching up the top or coming up around the cuff, every once in a while, there's just a couple little snaggles there. Just definitely, please feel free to leave me a comment in the comment box down below, or you can email me directly at info@crochetcrafty.com. I have so had a blast showing you how to make these mittens. If you're curious about doing any other winter crochet items, just check out this little link here. And if you haven't pressed subscribe already, make sure you do so you'll never miss an episode. We upload every Wednesday. In the meantime, gang, have a great day, happy crocheting, and take care.